Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's panel Planning for Anti Racist Cities: How Planners Can Champion Racial Equity in the Field. Hosted by the BUcity CoLab Week, which is organized by the City Planning and Urban Affairs program at Met College at Boston University, we are delighted to welcome you all. All the events are being recorded and you can access them on the event webpage once they become available to post. On behalf of the City Planning and Urban Affairs program, I want to welcome all of you to day 4 of the BUcity CoLab Week of Events. For those who have attended our earlier events this week, you may already know that the CoLab Week is conceived as a collaborative space where our community can come together to discover, learn, and connect. And this is particularly important at a time where most of us may need some more ways to connect with the larger world or our immediate community. We hope that being part of the CoLab Week's events, you can do just that. We also encourage your comments and questions via the Zoom chat throughout the event. We have moderators standing by who will be taking the questions at the end of the panel. Just a reminder that all the week's events are free, absolutely fantastic in their own right. And for the students of the program, this is a week where you don't have to go to class and you don't have to hopefully do a lot of homework. We welcome all of you, students, lifelong learners, and beyond, to discover, learn, and connect. This evening, we are delighted to welcome our eminent, courageous, and passionate panelists who have all committed to reducing racial injustice. They are all women of color, leaders in their own right, and I am proud to say that many of our panelists today are alumni of our very own CPUA program. During today's event, the panelists will weigh in on some hard questions based on their professional expertise and individual experiences. Questions such as how can planners adapt a racial equity lens in their profession? What role does academia play in preparing planners in helping create anti racist cities? This timely and valuable panel this evening will be moderated by Beya Jimenez, who is an extraordinary leader in this field, and she is also the Director of Economic Opportunity in the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Beya. Please introduce the rest of the panelists, and to all of you, a big welcome.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I hope each of you are tuning in safe, healthy, and thriving. My name is Beya Jimenez, and I'm an alum of Boston University's Urban Affairs graduate program. I'm so honored to be here this evening to share back with my Boston University community. After completing my degree in 2017, I've gone on to serve under a housing advocacy agency, then later as a civic engagement advocate in Roxbury, and now in my current role at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, where I hold the proud title of Director of Economic Opportunity. At the Chamber, my role focuses on creating access to opportunity with an emphasis on corporate engagement to help address systemic issues to close the racial wealth gap. In tonight's panel, I am joined by a slew of professionals, all whom I know personally, who advocate for racial equity within their roles. During this time of unprecedented loss and in a political climate that puts personal interests before that of its people, it feels like the time is now to say enough, to stare racism in the face and call it for what it is, a divisive tool that harms Black and white people in a multitude of ways. Racism gives false hope to white people and chastises anyone who goes against that system. The contributions of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian people in this country have too often been ignored, erased, and cast aside. I am hopeful, as are the people on this panel, that a new era of awakening has finally arrived. No longer will we shy away from what is real. It is not enough to be racist. We need to be anti-racist and fight racism and inequality with every tool at our disposal. With that being said, the urban planning profession has too often been on the wrong side of equity in the advancement of racial equality. The history of redlining and segregation in our communities does not lie. Neither does the mass infrastructure projects that often led to the destruction of communities of color across America, displacing Black and Brown people and causing generational trauma that is playing out in today's present moment. In order for our planning profession to redeem itself and find a path forward to save our cities and our planet, we need to act now. We need our planning schools to be relevant and to cover this history accurately through its curriculum. We need students like you tonight who are engaged and ready to ask tough questions. And we need planning professionals who won't sit on the sidelines and allow the status quo to work as is. Planning professionals play a key role in helping shape our cities, their policies, and how they choose to stand up or not for racial equity. And we cover so many diverse areas, including government, business, public health, and many more areas. It is time to upset the setup and bring more people into the conversation and find a new path forward for our cities, for our country, for our global footprint. Thankfully, there are many of us who have begun to take a leap on this new path to create a diverse and inclusive future, one that includes everyone, not just a few. So how can planners adapt a racial equity lens? And what role does academia play in preparing planners in creating new anti-racist cities? These are the questions we will be focused on tonight. As always, please ensure to engage in the chat. It's been great already to see where all of you are tuning in from. Please tell us what's resonating throughout the conversation tonight. And please make sure to submit any questions for our wonderful panelists during the Q&A function below. So with that, I'd like to get started and introduce tonight's speakers. We have Joyce Sanchez. Hi, Joyce. She's with Stakeholder Management at National Grid. We also have Megan Venable Thomas, who holds multiple titles, but tonight she will be representing Enterprise Community Partners. We have Jessica Martinez. Hi, Jessica. She's tuning in from Mexico, and she is with Mass Development. And of course, last but certainly not least, is Courtney Lewis, who is a land use planner and regional planner at the Mass Area Planning Council. Welcome, everyone. So in order to get started tonight, one of the questions that I wanted to ask, of course, 2020 has been an incredible year. I mean, even just before this panel, I had to turn off my notifications because I saw a landmark milestone of COVID-19 hitting over 9 million detected cases. I want to ask all of the panelists tonight as we get started, what has been one of the ways that you've been taking care of your mental health? As people of color, as Black people, as Black and Brown people, I know that mental health is not something that we often talk about. So I intentionally want to start tonight's conversation and asking you, how are you supporting yourself in your self-care practices? And how are you bringing your full self to the workplace?
I guess I'll start us off. Beya, thank you so much for introducing us. You are lovely. So pretty much, I think during this time, I definitely take moments to step back and take those moments for myself. I think through this pandemic, I've discovered a lot of things about myself that I enjoy, and it doesn't require my laptop or my phone. You know, I write poetry, I take walks, I read more books more than ever. And I think that's the way I take care of myself and I take care of my mental health. And I also think what kind of also uplifts me through this time is really just like my actual role. So, I work with the community as a stakeholder manager, and it honestly brightens my day when I can address a concern with a resident or a business owner, or I make them feel like they actually have a voice or a say in a project that's coming up. So I think with the combination of those things, I think that's the way I take care of myself, and I kind of see hope in that, and that silver lining in all of this. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for sharing that. Courtney.
Sure. So I participated in a webinar over the summer, similar to this one. It was a panel of urban planners, and it was moderated by Jay Pitter, who's a Black urbanist and fellow at the Canadian Urban Institute. And she asked the panelists a very similar question, and she articulated perfectly how I have felt at moments throughout this pandemic. And what she said was, as human beings who are both Black and urbanists, doing work at the site where protests, rage, and death is happening, we are facing a dual crisis. We're facing a crisis that is personal, watching our communities die, and we're facing a crisis of having to show up lucid, articulate, compassionate, and focused because we are also professionals. And for me, and for many others, I'm sure this has been a tremendous weight. Like the weight of things has been extremely heavy. And I've been able to cope and persevere with the love and support of God, my partner, my family, and friends. They've really held me together whenever I felt like everything around me was falling apart. And I also feel like something that's helped a lot uh, with feeling down or depressed is seeking out ways to help or be of service to others.
Thank you so much for that, Courtney. Megan?
Yeah, I think for me, one of my few jobs is also at a fitness studio called TrillFit, whose mission is to decolonize and desegregate the wellness industry by providing increased access to wellness programming, supporting the initiatives of local organizations that focus on achieving health equity, and fostering collaboration with public and private sectors to kind of redefine what wellness experiences look and feel like for people of color. And so I think service and resistance is part of the practice that is lifting me up right now. But at the same time, I'm an instructor there as well. And I lead a cardio dance class, I lead a boot camp class, and I lead a meditation, a mindfulness class every Sunday at 4. It's free, so check it out at trill.fit if you're interested. But I think wellness is really imperative during these times for our mental health, for our well-being, but also a community of connection to build social cohesion, a place where you feel included and like your identity is lifted up and represented, I think is also super important, because what we know in public health is that communities most likely to survive and thrive are not just structurally sound in the face of disaster, they are socially connected. And so we really need those opportunities to know that we have people, that people have our backs. But also we know from many of our ancestral offerings that folks have left us, and the tools that folks have left us, like Audre Lorde, tell us that rest is resistance, that rest is self-preservation. And so we also have to find those moments to take a step back, to rest, to connect with ourselves, connect with nature. And I think that is really, that balancing is helping me to stay hopeful during these times.
Thank you so much for those words. Rest is resistance. I love that. Jessica?
Hello, I'm joining from very spotty Wi-Fi, so feel free to tell me if I'm starting to freeze up. I think for me, this is very new, and I'm a terrible Hispanic person by saying this, is I've never been close to my family, and this has been a time to get closer, um, to call without being prompted for a reason, or to check in on my grandma, to check in with my cousins. That's been something that I've been very fortunate to get a little more into. So shout out to the fam. But yeah, I mean, rest is so important. I realized that, especially at the beginning of this pandemic, I felt a lot of guilt, um, because I'm very privileged. I got to keep my job. I got to continue to pay my bills. I got, a forbearance on my student loans, which I really didn't technically need, but I was like, hell yeah, I'll take that, guilt-free forbearance. So I felt a lot of privilege at the beginning, and that guilt turned negative. I was like, I need to donate keep donating to your nonprofits. But I was like, I'm going to donate all the money I'm making. I'm profiting off of this pandemic. And I realized that's not healthy to be, consistently stressed out that you're not more stressed out. So recognizing that, leveraging the privilege that we have, even as people of color, first generation, et cetera, like use that to refresh yourself, because it's that plane ride scenario, like you need the mask of fresh air so that you can keep caring and staying strong for others, our small businesses, our families, our friends. So be well for yourself.
Thank you, all of you, for sharing that. And please, to those in the chat, please share with us what your mental health practices are. I'm taking notes, and I'm gonna steal some of these practices too. But thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's very important for us to recognize, yes, we're dealing with multiple extreme circumstances at this time. So one of my questions, and this will be for all of you, with COVID-19 highlighting the existing disparities across race and genders, Courtney, brought it up in his opening remarks. What role do planners face in helping create and address public health now that we're seeing now this call to action and people saying, racism is a public health threat? How do we now take advantage of that moment, and how has your role changed, if at all, during this time? Megan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is imperative. I think one thing that we know, an organization that we work a lot with in my role at Enterprise Community Partners is Mass Design Group, which is a social impact architecture firm. And they talk a lot about how design is not neutral. It either harms or it heals. And knowing that community is the number one place where we see health disparities play out, that planners have a very unique role in determining the future prosperity, or even impacting the future prosperity of our communities. And I believe that, you have an opportunity to either perpetuate existing challenges out there in our communities as you think about the ways in which you design and configure, or you have the opportunity to first undesign some of these challenges that we see in our community in order to collectively collaborate and imagine a future that works for people, that isn't centered on the commodity, right, of planning and housing, but is really focused on how do we create thriving places where people can have dignity, can have home, can have safety, security, and feel good about where they live. And so I think right now is a real opportunity, because, we keep hearing that, we keep hearing this information and this data around how zip codes are some of our number one determinants, right, of our life expectancy, of our, not only our ability to thrive, but our ability to live. And so I think planners and people that work in community have to see that, you're not just a planner or a designer, you're also a health practitioner, you're also a cultural, right, practitioner. You are where people meet, the place where they spend the most times of their lives and where they are most impacted during their life course, and that's their community. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for planners to get out there, to be up on the front, and to really show their stuff and what they know, and have an opportunity to give us a new imagination. Yeah.
I love that. A new imagination. Courtney, can you chime in?
Sure. I meant to address this in my initial question before responding to the initial question, but I just wanted to say that I'm extremely honored to share this space with amazing women of color. I feel you guys do so much for our community, and you definitely don't get the acknowledgement and recognition that you deserve at times. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that. And now to respond to the question, I feel that as planners, and especially as planners of color, we have a responsibility for advancing racial equity in our work, in our and in our and in the communities that we've been entrusted to serve. Because urban planning has perpetuated institutional racism in our cities and towns, and is responsible for many of the disparities in communities of color. I feel that we have an obligation to be campaigners of empowerment. We have to bring light to specific factors within the social and physical environment that contribute to these disparities, and we have to recognize that we're positioned at the nexus of urban design and public health and economic opportunity. And so we have to refuse to preserve the status quo, and we have to be agents of change, working diligently to undo disparities caused by the built environment.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and I appreciate the words of appreciation as well. Joyce?
Honestly, Megan and Courtney took half my words out my mouth, and the rest were just amazing. Like, they said it perfectly. I have no further comments on this question.
Absolutely. So Joyce, tell us, how has your role changed, and what do you envision the public and private sector playing in creating access to opportunity for people of color?
Yeah,
Can
sure.
you talk to us about your work at National Grid?
Yeah, of course. So as far as what my work looks like now, as you know, National Grid is considered an essential function. So we have pressed through COVID-19. So a part of my job is meeting with residents and business owner, whoever is pretty much impacted by the project, and I'm still required to do that. But now it's like, can this be a phone call? Could this be a video call? Like, how can I use other, I guess, channels of communication and still be effective? So, we're just being more intentional around that, just because of the social distancing guidelines and everything. In the case that that I have to have an in-person meeting, we just always adhere to the state and company COVID-19 guidelines, and we wear all our protective personal equipment. So it hasn't, personally, when it comes to working with the community, it hasn't changed that much, just because it's such a hands-on job. But we're still pressing forward, and for the most part, we're still functioning the same, outside of going into the office every single day. Most people, are working from home, so the people that are in the field are people who are working with the community, such as my team, or, our linesmen, or someone, they have to be out in the field, and they have to be working for our, physically in person for our communities. So that's how it looks like right now. So as far as to address your second question about how I envision like the public and private sector kind of playing a role, is that I think that the public and private sector should, I think more than ever, should be more intentional with their resources, and pretty much use their additional capacity to expand or create programs to focus on like the skill and education gap. Something I've noticed, especially when I was applying to work at National Grid, is that sometimes I feel like time and time again, I think people of color, they run into the issue where they have the skill set, but they don't have all the education requirements, or it's vice versa, where they have the education, but don't have all of the skills or maybe the experience, because, you know, that plays a big role in getting a position. So I think that private and public sector organizations should definitely invest in that a little bit more. And I'll provide 2 examples from National Grid. So National Grid has a program called Grid for Good. It specifically focuses on youth between the ages of 16 to 24. And it specifically focuses and targets, you know, students who have like, are pretty much have a socioeconomic disadvantage and provide them that opportunity. You know, within that Grid for Good program, there's a pathways program, there's a mentorship program, among other things. So it's definitely incredibly helpful, and I'm personally a mentor in the program. So, and it's so amazing to see how diverse that program is. And also the leader of that program is a woman of color. So that it just makes me so happy. Another example is the National Grid Graduate Development Program. A lot of people aren't aware of this either, and that this focuses more on people that have graduated with their bachelor or master's degree, but it doesn't require any prior like internships or anything like that. And pretty much it's also focuses on being diverse and on not only interviewing, but also hiring a diverse set of candidates that will pretty much be leaders in the energy industry. So I feel like the private and public sector can make a really, really big impact when the leaders within a company care about the diverse workforce that they have and also the diverse communities that they serve.
Wow, that is amazing, Joyce. I would love if you can share some of those resources that you mentioned for talent and pipeline development. Please feel free to share it in the chat with our speakers tonight, with our audience tonight. That would be great. And I'm so glad to hear that. This is the first time I'm hearing of it. So I'm so glad to see you in that space and to hear that you're a mentor. That's great to hear. Jessica, gateway cities have been championed as areas of opportunity as more Black and Brown professionals choose cities like Lawrence, my hometown, Salem, and Brockton for their access to affordable homeownership, and despite the commute to urban centers. How have demographics changed in these cities, and what opportunities does that pose for planners to rethink the area's built environment, specifically around housing, transit, and job access?
You know, just like easy housing, transit, job access, like super easy to solve that. It's for full disclosure, I only worked in Lawrence for 2 years, but I feel like I'm like mad repping like my love for Lawrence anytime someone will give me the opportunity. I'm from Los Angeles originally, and I moved out here for school, and then I did a very short stint in the Midwest. And then I came to Lawrence, and it's honestly not that different, because so what we want as humans is like dignity, you know, stable schooling for our children, jobs, like that's just kind of baseline. So gateway cities, for those that don't know the terminology, it's a Massachusetts distinction for post-industrial cities in our state. You should know this, it's like 26 gateway cities, don't quote me. Check the Wikipedia article. We have other professionals that could probably speak way better to this, like Tracy in the chat. I love her. But gateway cities, what they offer is really good bones to a city. They were industrial centers that predate cars. So the urban centers are walkable. You've got the common, you've got the business corridor. They often mid-century started to get attached to the commuter rail systems. So they have this amazing infrastructure. And I feel like a crazy old man yelling at the clouds like in The Simpsons when I'm like, coronavirus gave us an opportunity to bring more young people to gateway cities by building them more collaborative workspaces and more live workspaces, especially for artists. Like, we can make this space cool using the internet now. And everyone's like, I think we still need one parking spot per apartment. I'm like, no, let's not do that. Like, what if we build grocery stores? And I think something else to confuse is that we're not building entertainment centers, we're building downtowns. So I think that gets really confused in Boston sometimes. We're like, wow, look at the theater district, look at these posh restaurants and small plates and tapas and brunch. And I'm like, yeah, that's nice, but I don't do that every day. Like, I need to walk to the grocery store in my pajamas when I forget, my risotto and I need some more. We need jobs. We need jobs with minimum wage and higher and median salaries. We need more options and diversity of housing. I really wanted to move to Lawrence and I couldn't find an apartment. It was wild. Like, I've been working in this place for 2 years and I still couldn't find a place to live there because people want to be there. So yeah, diversity of housing, walkable options, services. We really have an opportunity, and I think just as important as the policy portion is, we as planners have a lot of say in literally writing the policies. I'm in Mexico right now, and there's a saying someone said to me, "Mala hierba nunca muere," the bad herb never dies. And I think we should see each other as like gardeners who are making the bed. We're like nourishing it, we're giving it the access and the essentials. But as planners, we really don't need to direct and orchestrate and over architect and over design. The people actually can do so much more than we expect them to.
I
And
love that. Jessica, you and I can talk about Lawrence all day, girl. But I love that. I love that. I love the idea of planners as gardeners. I love that. Courtney, I'm going to come back to you. We're talking about cities as a regional planner at the Metro Area Planning Council. I know it covers over, 100 municipalities, something like that, all different in shape and community makeup. Jessica just told us, we're gardeners as planners, and we need to bring people into these conversations to help shape their cities as the places that they live and work and play. Can you talk to us about your work at MAPC and how you're doing all of that and more?
Sure. So, focusing specifically on equity, it's one of the 4 strategic priorities of the agency for the region. And it's one of the things that led me to apply and then eventually come to work for MAPC. I've been there for 2 years now. And one of the things that we have spent a lot of time working on this year as an agency is using an equity lens to take a more of a introspective look at our policies, our practices, and work, so that we're not just saying this is our priority or this is what we believe in, but that we're actually walking the talk. We've made some progress in the past 2 years, but like many other public institutions, we have a lot of work to do. And a lot of that work is led by our equity team, which which has representatives from each department, and they've played a huge role in actively working to develop a racial equity action plan. They've also worked with each of the individual departments to ensure that we're not only centering equity in our work, but that we're operationalizing it as well. So within our agency, we also have a staff of color affinity group. And this group is supposed to act as a safe place for staff of color to process together and to mentor one another. We also work alongside the equity team to provide feedback to leadership and the agency as a whole on racial equity. And one big change that that the group has been pushing for within the agency is changes to our contracting language. So making sure that it reflects equity and diversity in our contracts, our project scopes, our RFPs, that hold our vendors and our partners responsible in advancing racial equity throughout the region.
I'm so happy to hear that. And I'm so glad that you came to Boston and that you chose us. We need you here, so.
Yeah, I also know, although I wasn't directly involved with this project, MAPC just launched the REMAP program, which is Racial Equity Municipal Action Plan, and it's a partnership between the Boston Federal Reserve and the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And they're working with it's a pilot project, and they're working with 6 different communities within our region to help them develop racial equity action plans. And the link for that is posted in the chat. So if you want more information about that program and the resources, please check it out.
Thank you. And we have some great staff from BU helping us today. Shout out to Naji. Thank you so much for dropping all of those resources. So thank you for sharing that, Courtney. Megan, you have multiple roles. Girl, I don't know if you're a clone, how you do what you do. Can you talk to us about Mission Trail and maybe give us a little bit of insight of what you're up to and what the pledge is?
Absolutely. So I have lots of jobs. One of which is at TrillFit. We recently launched the Pledge for Racial Justice, Anti-Racism, and Equality in the Wellness Industry. And as an organization, we are calling on our fellow leaders in the wellness industry to really accompany their statements around Black Lives Matter with a pledge to invest in the future of Black communities' health and to create cultures of inclusivity. We know that we don't all have the ability to control what our organizations do, but we can change our own behavior. And this pledge calls for folks to commit to themselves, to what and to pushing their organizations. And then our organizational pledge really asks people to put their money where their mouths are through increasing education in their organizations, increasing access to their opportunities, increasing the ways in which they fund and support and engage with and participate with their local communities, right? The folks who are surrounding where their building is, and having a particular focus on health equity, understanding that access is a huge barrier in the wellness industry, and yet believing that, right, wellness is a right that all people should be afforded to. How do we really reconcile that gap? And so this pledge is asking for folks to think about that, and to come up with a strategy for how they want to do things a little bit differently. And so we're really excited at TrillFit to have over 800 folks signing on, to be talking with organizations about those plans at places like ClassPass and Exhale and MindBody, and big organizations that are really saying, I want to do something differently. And so, we thought this was part of our responsibility as a business of color, and as women of color who want to impact our communities differently and provide access for folks, that collaboration is a real key to that. and that we need to be able to work with other folks and come together in order to have a more collective impact. We can't do it by ourselves. We can't do it with a few of us. We all kind of need to be coming together in a concerted effort in order to even make a small impact on this system and this industry that has really been inequitable for many hundreds of years. So
absolutely. And now this is a question for all of the panelists. We have plenty of students listening in tonight. Thank you so much to Boston University again for hosting this whole week of events and giving people the week off. I don't remember getting this during my time, but we'll talk about that later. But of course, I know that these students are going through a very extraordinary time. So I want to take this opportunity to ask, what advice may you share with students looking to enter the field of planning? What advice would you give for perhaps Black and Brown students who perhaps don't see themselves as represented in the industry? What advice do you have for them? And maybe even what advice would you give yourself 5 years ago, looking back during your time? Joyce, I'll start with you.
All right, so I think two pieces of advice I have is number one, don't underestimate networking and never stop. It's just so important. It's so crucial, especially when you're young in your career, to connect with as many people as you possibly can and find those lifelong mentors. And also, you never know of what'll come out of a conversation or just catching up with someone over, I guess, a virtual coffee now, because we're not doing that in-person coffees anymore. But I know personally, I would have never known that National Grid had a stakeholder management team in general had I not networked. That was something someone approached me about, and I was like, wow, I didn't know that. And I looked into it, and now I'm here. So that's just like one way, networking can kind of like do a 180 in your life. Number two, I think knowing your worth is super important, especially as a person of color, especially as an educated person of color. Definitely don't sell yourself short. And something I wrote down was, and something I always did when I was interviewing, is that I would always ask, prior to accepting a job, I would always ask a company how effective their current diversity initiatives were, and if they had any type of benchmarks or any way they were actually tracking how effective it was. Because a lot of times companies will say things or announce, I'm doing this initiative, and then not have any structure or any really numbers to prove that this is working, or the people of color in the workforce, in the workplace are happy, etc. So it's really important to press that, if not in your interview, then maybe in an email after you, I guess, before you accept the job, but after you get the job offer. But I definitely would say press in on that, and that's something I personally did when I was interviewing. And I think it worked out well, because National Grid is one of the most diverse utility companies in the world. So I think I landed in a good spot.
I'm happy to hear that. Jessica, what about you? What advice do you have for planning students?
And to Beya's point, like, I feel for you folks, like, our work is so in the place, and this is a very difficult time. I would suggest, even if it's not for networking, don't stop reaching out to people if you have questions about the profession or the field. There was like a friend of a friend who said, I have a friend who's interested in a career in planning. Can they talk to you? And this person I've kept in touch with over the years, and they've continued to grow and get more into the process. Do the same with your peers, do the same with people at your work. I think people are generally really happy to talk about their specialties or their passions with you. And that's how you're going to keep learning more in the field, even as you become more specialized in your work.
Thank you. Courtney?
A word of advice would be take advantage and learn as many of the different topic areas within the planning profession as you can. Always take advantage of every opportunity to show to express thanks and gratitude to those that you're working alongside. And advice that I would have given myself 5 years ago. So recently I've been reading this book by Dr. Cindy Trim, and there's a passage in the book that really resonated with me in response to this question about advice to myself. And it says, have faith in who God made you to be. You are here to give the world your unique presence, perspective, gifts, abilities, and talents. Your outlook, thoughts, and ideas, including your unique way of seeing things, really does make a difference. Your worth, you are worth more than anyone could ever compensate you for, because of the unique blessing you bring to the world. But you must be faithful to protect and cultivate it, continually grow, courageously face challenges, and always give your best. By doing so, you help make this world a better place. And by the way, your best should never be compared to someone else's best. Your best is your best. In celebrating yourself, don't forget to show gratitude to others who, like you, also choose to give their best. Don't compete, don't get jealous, don't compare. Instead, celebrate yourself and others.
Oh my goodness, you are taking us to church tonight. That was amazing. Megan, I want to give you an opportunity too.
Thanks. I would say that your experience is part of your expertise as a Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, whoever you are, that experience is one that should be lifted up, should be heard as expertise in the ways in which you bring that to your practice. So don't let people discount that. Don't let people hit you with the academic facts about what they read in the books. Your experience in this country as a person of color is expertise. And when you step fully into that, right, and you have a reverence for that, you then show reverence for community, right? And that's really how we begin to shift power in these disciplines, in particular community development, right? When we show up as our full selves, recognizing our expertise and power, we then lift up those residents in our communities and in those communities whose voices and bodies and experiences should be at the table informing how we do planning, how we do development, how we do design in this country. And so if you haven't read Emergent Strategy, it's one of my favorite books that I open up almost every single day when I'm doing facilitation, when I'm in community, when I'm doing work. And one of the principles says, what you pay attention to grows. And I think, one of the lies about racism, someone told me, is that self-doubt for people of color is what is to distract us from our work, right? Self-doubt is part of racism constructions. It's to sidetrack us, right? It's to make us believe that our expertise, our experience, our experience in this world is not valuable to the ways in which should be reflected in what we want. And so I would say, I wish somebody had told me in my academic environments, your experience is expertise and you need to step into that, and less of, do we always got to keep talking about race? Oh, here goes Megan. She's going to say something else about race. But if everybody, right, if every person of color in that classroom, if every person of color in that boardroom, if every person of color in that community meeting stepped into that, how different would that conversation be? So I would just say, know who you are, know who you is, know who, know all of those things are valuable, and that's part of your work.
I love that. And just to echo what everyone said, we belong in every single room, period. Like, we belong in every single room. Oof, I could keep going tonight, but we have a couple of audience questions. I'm going to share this for everyone, so feel free to take it up. How do we reshape the political and financial system barriers that continue to create leaders who say these policies are unfair but do nothing to take action? This is coming from our audience tonight. Who wants to take a stab?
I'm gonna make mine very short. There's the big stuff, and that's big, and that's gonna take time, but then there are also things that we need to focus and push more, things like ranked choice voting or representation in municipal leadership. Like the things that we don't normally think of, like our local reps or our counselors, those are smaller things that I think we could put more energy to that are tangible, and we're gonna see that output in a few years, if not a few months.
Anyone else have any thoughts? All right, we'll keep going. We have a couple. I'm just scrolling through the chat. The chat is on fire tonight. So thank you everyone for tuning in and being so responsive to the conversation tonight. Another question, how are you seeing the ripple effects of economic and social impacts from COVID in the communities that you are working in? Courtney, I'll share this question for you.
Okay. Well, I think it's very apparent. I mean, people are struggling to hold on to businesses and their livelihoods. We're seeing people being evicted from their homes, and we're looking for ways to combat um, that. Um, I There is no one answer or solution. I think it takes everyone being actively involved and holding the people in positions, our elected officials, holding them accountable, and also um, just um, demanding for change.
Here's another question from our audience. For the panelists, as planners of color, how do you deal with it when people in power deny your agency or expertise? Joyce, I'll go to you.
How would I go about answering this? So one thing I always do is I give 100% every single day, right? And I make sure I give 100% every single day, so no one can tell me that I have not tried all the avenues or given all the effort each every day that I work. You know, and in a particular moment when that happens, you know, luckily because the workplace I have is so diverse, I'm fortunate enough to have supervisors who are Black. I have one, I'm sorry, African American, and then I have the one that's highest up is a Hispanic woman. So if I have an issue with someone or someone is coming off to me a certain way, there are like processes in place in my organization to address those issues in a professional way. And I believe it's that way because we work so much together. I have, for example, I have a portfolio of 35 projects right now, and I work with a slew of people. But for a lot of my projects, I cross paths, with the same people. So it's one of those things where I may have not liked what you said in that moment, or how you approached me in that moment. But I have to figure out a way to navigate that in a way where when I need to work with you in the future, we don't run into this issue again.
Thank you, Joyce. Anyone else? What happens when someone questions your expertise as a planner of color?
I mean, I'm not a planner of color. I'm a doctor in public health, but I have also had my expertise discounted many times. My former life was not even my former, I'm still in the National Guard, but I went to West Point undergrad. I was in the Army for 6 years, active duty. I currently am in the National Guard, and I do sexual assault response coordination for the National Guard. And I have been in many rooms where people have discounted my voice, and not because they had heard it, obviously, but because of what I look like. And so I think one of the things that you have to grow into is your knowing your value, as I think Joyce was saying earlier, and knowing when you want to fight through your words, and knowing when you need to preserve your energy, and step into your healing. Because I think a lot of us think that every environment is one in which we have to be in combat mode. I have been in actual combat and know that that's not necessarily what's going to sustain you, right? Like, we have so many other things in this world, in this country, that are here to take us down, that are here not to lift us up and to further our health and well-being. And so I think understanding that there are a lot of obstacles out there, that you have an opportunity, an option, an agency to choose what situations are for you. And if those situations don't value you as they should, that there are other places out there that can do a better job. And I think what we're seeing right now, right, is a real validation for many of us who have been in this work for many years, this social justice work, that is saying, yeah, there's a real problem. There are people emailing me that are like, oh, that thing that you used to talk about all the time? Yeah, I see you now. And so know that, again, your experience is expertise in many ways. And if your organization, if a place that you're applying to doesn't realize that, then maybe it's not for you. And you have choices. You have agency always in that.
I love that. We always have a choice, and making sure that we're choosing our battles. Not every battle deserves your energy or your strength. Sometimes it's better to just say, hey, you know what? This place isn't serving me. Thank you for that, Megan. Continuing with the panelist questions, the audience questions for our panelists. How do we inspire underrepresented students to pursue careers that they aren't typically exposed to? And this person shared, the whole reason I'm taking this class is because I'm looking for social solutions and trying to figure out what to do. I see everyone nodding. Jess, I'll pick on you.
This is something that we were talking with the planners of color about, was that we need to be entering our educational spaces. Different countries treat city planning at different levels, at federal and state levels. I didn't hear about planning until the end of my undergrad. And I was like, wow, I wish someone could explain this to me, like when I, was younger, instead of falling into it. And I think we we have, as planners networks, active networks, where we could be entering the school. But from there, teaching younger people that planning really is a survey course, and you could go into so many different fields, as an architect, as an engineer, as a public health specialist. We have so many different avenues we could enter.
And I'll just echo what just said. I think it's important to create this pipeline and expose high school students to planners of color as early as possible, because representation really does matter and it's very important. I was a bit hesitant to do tonight's panel, just because I sometimes get slightly uncomfortable with speaking, but I did it because I know how much of a difference it would have made and meant to me when I was in planning school. Like, I didn't have someone that was a planner. Out of all the people that came, all of the guest lecturers and visiting professors that came through my program, none of them, or very few of them, were people of color, and none of them were Black. And so I just felt it was important that students see, and hopefully something I say inspires someone to push through, to persevere, because it matters. It really does make a difference. Similar to what Jess said, I didn't know what urban planning was. My first introduction to urban planning was through playing the computer game SimTown. And that was like when I was younger. I never had the vocabulary to name what the job title was. And it wasn't until I was in college as an undergrad that I actually understood, oh, this is that it really connected for me. Like, this is what I really want to do. Knowing that that I have the power to shape the environment around me was really powerful.
And you're getting so much love in the chat. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm so glad that you said yes to my invitation. You better not say no to me. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you do what you do and that you represent us in every single way. We're getting close to our time, but I'm gonna try to fit in at least 2 more questions. This can go to anyone, so feel free to chime in. How can we plan and design streetscapes that are safe for people of all backgrounds? Given that the current power hierarchy of users and status quo are failing Black and Brown communities, what does a safe and inclusive transportation paradigm look like? Jess, want to take it up?
Start. I work actually in a program that really, it does pilots. We pilot weird, hard, difficult ideas. We try to simplify it as best as we can, and we pilot it. So I think to start is inspiring imagination in people. It's really easy to go, oh my God, someone's gonna rip up and make a bunch of crosswalks and roundabouts. That sounds horrible. How am I gonna drive? But if you start to pilot it, if you start to practice maybe like once a week, once a month, once a year, Cicla Via, for example, is a pilot of how we could transform our city streets into walkable and bikeable places. So try piloting.
I love that. We don't know until we try, right? And we might as well try. So this will be the final question, and Joyce is a hot one, and it's for you. This is from our audience. We were told to ask tough questions, so here goes. How do you reconcile a company like National Grid's progressive racial equity policies with ideas of environmental justice? When we talk about the inequitable impacts of climate change, the poor indoor air quality attributed to natural gas usage, how do you kind of hold, I guess, those two differing dichotomies?
Can you repeat that question one more time for me?
Absolutely. I guess he's asking, or the person is asking, how do you reconcile, the fact that they have some new progressive racial equity policies with, I guess, the harm that they've done in the past?
Mm-hmm.
And this is really a question in general, right?
Yeah.
We started the conversation and talking about the history of planning and the segregation of many of our communities. I guess, how do we hold these two truths together?
Definitely. So I'll start off by saying, and I believe in June 2020, the US President Badar Khan of National Grid actually came out in support of Black Lives Matter and those fighting for social justice. So it's definitely something that our leadership values and finds to be important. As far as kind of what's happened in the past, that's a big reason why the stakeholder management team exists, because utility companies did have a reputation of coming in and kind of doing what they wanted because they had the right to. And someone finally stopped and said, just because we have the right, does that mean we just barge in? Shouldn't we knock first? Like, shouldn't we be good neighbors? So that's how the whole stakeholder management community engagement department came about. So we are currently, I think, to Jess's point, kind of like piloting almost, because we're such a new team. We're definitely one of the newest teams at National Grid, and kind of piloting, working with the community and being more inclusive, and more specifically being more inclusive during the during the process and during projects, active projects, whether they be substation projects or transmission line projects. So
I'm so glad to hear that, Joyce.
It's one of those things where we're still
grappling with that.
Yeah, we're still
Absolutely.
trying to wrap our heads around it, but definitely trying to make amends.
Absolutely. And you being there is just as important as well, because you're changing the face of the company. So I have a closing question for all of you. One of the things that I want to close us with, and thank you so much to our audience for being so engaging tonight and using the chat. What do you see and what do you hope to see as a vision for our future? How can we use this moment of racial justice reckoning to champion for racial equity in planning and public health and all of the areas that we work in? Megan, I see you with your thinking face. I'll pick on you.
The question is, how do we take advantage or optimize this moment?
Yes.
I think that it's a real moment for us to think about, what does decolonization of these systems, what does indigenization, humanization of these systems and industries look like, and take a real opportunity for Black, Indigenous, people of color to interrogate their own trauma and the way they've experienced trauma and healing. Because I think decolonization starts, it happens with the systems, but it also has to happen with you, right? It has to happen with the way in which you've internalized the things that you've been impacted by, the ways in which these academic systems, right, these academic institutions have informed the ways in which you think about yourself, you think about data research, the way you think about practice and process, the ways in which, right, your interrelational or your relationships with other people, how it informs that as well, before we can even talk about how we're going to break down the system. And I think it's an opportunity to really call on our white colleagues to say, if you want to be anti-racist, if you want to be an ally, right, there are some real opportunities here for you to shift your practice. What does an actual decolonizing of some of these organizations, many of which that we work at and work for, what does a real shift in power look like, right? Like, whose job and roles have to change? what investments need to look different, and who we're investing in, and what communities and organizations we're investing in, right? Like what types of research and data inform, right, what we believe beauty and dignity and health and happiness look like in communities, right? A lot of that is not informed by the folks who live in these communities. And so I think it's a real opportunity for us to take a step back, for us to slow down, for us to recognize that a lot of the tools that we have for resilience and change are already there. They're already within our communities, because for Latinx, for Black people, for descendants of slaves, for Indigenous folks to exist is a testament to our resilience. So we've already been using some tools. And so I think a real shift around expertise, experience, who's in the room, who's making decisions, who are we funding, is ripe right now. And I hope that more people are pushing.
Yes. I'll take one more of you and then we will close. We are at our time. Anyone else? Closing thoughts? Megan took us to church, so I get it. She's been taking us to church all night.
Yeah, the only very, very short comment that I'll say is I think we should capitalize on this moment to really push for zoning reform across the Commonwealth. The fact that zoning is based on principles of exclusion says a lot about it dictates how dictates the built environment. Sorry, my connection is really shaky.
No, it's all good. We
So.
hear you loud and clear. Zoning reform is a segregation tool, as Annabelle shared with us in the chat. Someone even chimed in and said, Rhode Island needs zoning reform too. So it's not just Massachusetts. So thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you so much to Boston University and the City Planning and Urban Affairs Department for hosting tonight's conversation. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm so inspired by each of you and the work that you do. I'm so glad to call you my friends. Thank you to our audience and to the students. Please stay safe, stay healthy, keep speaking up, step into your power. Let's upset the setup. And please go vote if you haven't already. Thank you all. Have a great night.